Today Jack is going to show you how to get the cover off of a Brother knitting machine carriage so that you can work on it or clean it. He has shown you this in other movies, but this movie is devoted specifically to the removal of the cover. He's working on my 892 carriage, and it is very, very much like the majority of Brother knit carriages. So you can follow the movie even if you have a different model.
All right, we are going to take the cover off of this Brother knitting carriage. First thing is release the tension on your handle. I've had people tell me the screws would not come out, and it's because in the raised position there's a lot of tension on that screw, and we do not want that position. You will see me putting quite a bit of tension on this, and I know this particular carriage, I've had it apart dozens of times. Here's your screw, threads on the inside, and they actually go into this metal post right here. That's where the threads go, and it's a simple cross point. One side, other side. If these are sticky and you cannot get purchase to get the screwdriver to start those screws out, this is a really good place for the arrow coil. Put a few drops right in here because the threads go into this metal plate. So if you put a couple of drops on both sides of that metal plate, leave it sitting up like I'm holding it now, put something under this front edge, leave it 24 hours and it'll help that screw to come out if it hasn't been out in a few years. You will often hear me say start all the screws before you tighten any of them. And it's true with this handle configuration. It's often good to start the threads on one side just so that you don't get this kind of action. You can see where the handle with the screw out canters away from the mount, and it makes it difficult to get the other screw out. So when you're removing these, get them backed out so you can see the edge of the screw showing, but you see that it's still holding the handle. When you get them both in that condition, then you can go ahead and take them both out, and you'll notice, I'll do it on the other side so it's camera friendly, but you can see the end of the screw now, but it comes out a little bit more before you can get a hand grip on it and get it out. So now handle is gone. And these are the springs that handle presses down when it's in the locked up position. That's why we lay it down to get that spring tension off of it. Spring here, spring here. All right, these dials I find the easiest to get off, but notice your indicator, little red line, you're going to go right next to it and it pops off. But on my first attempt to remove one, I broke one of these 3 feet. Now I keep extra buttons, which is what this is, in my supply drawer because the older it is, the more brittle these little things become. And you'll notice it's got a tab on the inside, and that's what locks into this little semicircular cover. Notice there's a cutaway in the front of the cover, and that cutaway lines up to this foot, which lines up with that indicator mark. So when you're putting this back on, you see once it's loose, it'll rotate all around. So it behooves you to keep a finger on it when you're tightening it up and make sure that that cutaway is right pointed toward you so that when you put this cap on correctly, your indicator line tells you what number your stitch size is. And then off it comes. Now, here's the particulars about this. You see this circular groove here. That is what actually changes the stitch size as you rotate the dial. So the dial has to go on the post here. but it's also got to match up with this post that is the size indicator and changes underneath. Let me show you. I'll move it by hand. You see these two places here, they get longer or shorter, and that's what makes the change in your stitch size. So you got to make sure that these guys are nicely lubricated and that they slide smoothly, and you can move it by moving this with your finger. When you go to put the dial back on, depending on where this little post is relative to the center post, has to match so that it'll drop down into that groove in the proper condition. I like to start with it as close to this post as it can get, and then it starts in right there. And there you see it goes in. Now I can change my stitch size. 2 screws to take the cover off. If you look underneath here, there are screws everywhere. So what you have to do is determine which one is going to release the cover. These 2 look like they're holding this plate down. This one looks like it's holding this plate down, but right in here, there is a screw that apparently doesn't hold any of these things down. So what we're going to do is loosen that screw just a few turns. And look for the corresponding screw on the other side. And here's the test. Is the cover looser? Yes. So we've gotten to the right spot where we need it to be, and we'll go ahead and take these out. I say this, it's obvious if you've done your brother carriage before, but there's a lot of different carriages out there. They all have the same technique. There's a couple of screws that don't look like they're really doing anything. And if you'll notice, they're long screws with a self-tapping end on them so that they go into this boss on the cover. All right, we are inside. And it's okay to take these things off. I mentioned with my Marvel Mystery Oil soaking, these will turn pink. The mystery oil will get into this polymerized substance and it will dye it pink. If you don't mind, stick it in there.
But we usually ourselves take off all plastic pieces.
Right, we take the button covers off, and these 2 center buttons, I've had more people ask me about, they won't go back on correctly. What I do is when I take those off, I take the top one off and I mark it. Just take a black marker and mark the inside of it so that you know that was the top button and then the bottom button. So if you mark the top, and you can see I can start it off just with my thumbnail because it's been off so many times. Put your mark, a black magic marker, a laundry marker, make a mark right there. It won't show, you'll never see it until you take the button off, and now you know which one is the top button, so you don't get confused when you put them back.
When it's time to reassemble, the 2 screws that go in from underneath come first.
Again, this is an instance where start everything before you tighten anything up. And if you'll notice, I work on this end with my hand under holding the cover on its position so these guys stay where they belong. So I'm putting a little bit of pressure, holding the cover to the base while I get this screw in. The other one's already in, so then we can tighten it up. And what I did was deliberately use the small screwdriver to get it started, but this fits into these screws better. Same thing with the screws that put the handle in and out. It's easier to get this smaller shaft in there, but this tip fits the screw heads better. And again, on this end, when I started this screw, This is where it helps to have both hands working equally well. Holding the bed cover on with this free hand and then putting the screw down with the other hand. And there we are. Threads go in. Started in with the little guy, and you could see the handle move as it aligned itself. And I'll show you again on this one. There's a lot of float on these handles. But once you get to the right spot for those threads to match up, do you see my handle move? So everybody started in. These do not have to be super tight. You're usually never going to use this in the lowered position. It's only going to be put away in the lowered position. So there's no tension on this screw in this resting position, and it only has to be snug enough not to back out. Now, there we are, we're in business. It cannot come out of there in this using position. So when you're using the carriage, the spring puts enough tension on the hinge area to keep those in. And just glance, do you see it sticking out? No. So that means it's tight enough. Once again, I'll hold this up. This floats. I move it all the way out. I move it all the way in. I prefer the all the way in position. And that lets me try to start it so that this end of the groove matches that. And there we are. You know you're in the right spot when you hear it. I always put it on 5. There's a notch on 5. That lets me line up my retention plate so that the notch on the retention plate matches the notch on 5. You see, it's not in position yet. And I'm going to try and do it with my screwdriver. Right there like that.
And lining up the notches.
Right. See, the dial has a protrusion at 5, and the line up for the indicator on the dial cover is now in position with that. And you can do the snug with the big one and just put your finger on that and don't let it rotate. Now, I always start the back end and pop the front one right into place. 5, 6, 5, 4. Okay.
So and I like to check and make sure it goes the whole round of the dial.
Right. It actually goes past 10, and it goes way past 1 or 0. So yeah.
And we have full motion.
Yeah, but that's why when I assemble it, I always assemble it with the 5. So I know I'm right in the middle of the dial when I put it together. So if you want 8, you can get 8 when you go to knit. If you want 4, you can get 4 when you go to knit. But she's asked me before, why is it always on 5? That's to help me get it assembled properly so there's no confusion. And there we are ready to knit again.
Yay!